Welcome, folks. We'll give just one more minute to get things kicked off, and then we will start the webinar. Thanks for joining. Ready to get kicked off, Melissa?
Ready.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining the first of the digital transformation mini-series here. We're going to be talking about people-centered change management today. So very excited to get this kicked off. And before we dive into some introductions and start doing some of the Q&A, we just wanted to go over some housekeeping. This hopefully will be an interactive session, so we do have a questions bar for you all. If you have any questions throughout, please do drop them in. We'll have a full Q&A section at the very end of this webinar to be able to address some of your audience questions. So please feel free to drop in the questions along the way. And we will be sending out the slide deck after the fact, so don't feel like you have to grab screenshots or take notes as we go along. We can send all of that to you after. All right. So first, we'd love to just introduce ourselves and thank you for joining us. My name's Liz Seville. I work on the BrainSell team in our consulting division, and I'm accompanied here by Melissa, who will introduce herself in a moment. As we mentioned, we're going to be talking to you all about people-centered change, and I have a background in executive and leadership development training, and really love to talk about the people side of items here and how it impacts organizations. And now I have the pleasure of working alongside and going to be doing this webinar alongside Melissa. So I'll turn it over to you, Melissa, to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm Melissa, also work in the consulting division here at BrainSell. I have a background in implementing and maintaining a variety of SaaS applications. My previous experience prior to BrainSell was largely in spearheading software implementations internally as an IS manager. So I have deep experience on the user side of software management and in dealing with the people side of these changes.
Makes sense. People are all about this, every part of change. Great. We'll actually progress into a quick poll before we get started. We'd like to understand a pulse check of how familiar folks are with the topic at hand. So the first question we have for you there is, and let me just open the poll, is how familiar are you with the term change management? If folks don't mind putting in your selection, we have not familiar at all, only slightly familiar, moderately familiar, very familiar, or extremely familiar. All right, great. Well, interesting. So we have a pretty split audience. We have some folks that are very familiar, while others are only slightly familiar with change management. So thank you for taking the poll. And then we have a next question, which is how comfortable do you think people within your organization are with change? So again, this one will range from not comfortable at all to completely comfortable. Would love to get a pulse check from folks in the audience on how comfortable are people with change in your organization. And just give a second for folks to submit answers. All right, so a little more split here. We have really a wide range of how comfortable folks are with change, which honestly, it's rare for us to see very comfortable. That's great. So great to get started. And then for folks that are on that moderately comfortable, slightly comfortable, or not comfortable at all, perfect conversation for us to be having today on how we can help get your organization there. Great. So before we go into some questions with Melissa about change management, we just wanted to kick off this series with talking about, it's all about digital transformation. So what is digital transformation? It's the ability to create positive business impact through scaling people, process, data, and technology. And organizations that embrace digital transformation are 26% more profitable than their competitors. So it's something that we live and breathe here at BrainSell and are very much a fan of being able to help clients grow and scale through digital transformation. And at BrainSell in our consulting division, which Melissa and I work in, we work on this concept of blueprints where we're helping folks be able to understand business by going with their people, data, technology, and people, data, technology, and process, which you'll hear us say time and time again throughout this call. And we want to make sure that we're putting a plan in place. So ultimately, and Melissa will chat about this with us, I'm sure, throughout our conversation with her about change, but really having the technology in place is not the success measure of digital transformation. We know that all of those other components really play a role in ensuring that we are scaling and maturing digitally. So today we're going to focus on that people component. All right. Well, Melissa, I'm so excited to be chatting with you about this. And I know we got a pull from folks that are mostly familiar with change management, but if you don't mind just starting off by letting us know, how do you define change management?
So change management is all about managing the people side of change. So in any project, you'll have a project plan with a project manager, and that takes care of the technical side of the project, making sure all of those technical specifications are met. So a change management plan works alongside a project management plan to address the people involved in the project and the changes that that project brings about. So making sure that all of the people specifications are met, if you will, so that you have high user adoption and you really get the value that you're looking for out of your project.
That's great. Thank you. And why would you say that change management is an essential component for digital transformation?
Yeah, so projects are actually 7 times more likely to succeed with a strong change management plan in place. When you're undergoing a digital transformation, we can implement the best software with all the bells and whistles, but if your people aren't on board and aren't making use of it, then you're not going to see the value that you would expect from such an effort.
That makes sense and super compelling statistic. So, on a
Yeah.
similar vein, why is it important to get your people involved in digital transformation initiatives?
Yeah, so it's really important that people are aware of the changes that are coming and that you have a strong communication plan to support these big changes. People need to understand why the change is necessary and how they will benefit from it. And having this understanding will help them to better adapt to the change and will help the company to realize the full benefits of the change. Because really, it's not the company that is changing in a software implementation or anything involving digital transformation. It's really the people that are going to be using the technology that have to actually undergo the change.
That makes sense. And I think it's something that we probably overthink sometimes or don't even think of when we're going through changes internally. We're thinking that it's an organizational change, but it's really the people that make up that change. That's a great
Right.
point.
Yeah.
And what are some of the challenges that you found with change in general?
Change is hard. People can be very resistant to change. It's difficult for many people to even consider having to change their routines and habits. They come to be very reliant on those. And so change can create a feeling of uncertainty in people, a lack of control,
Hmm.
which can be very unsettling, right? So change can even be harder when proper communication isn't happening, and it can be challenging to stay on top of that communication, but it's so important to be proactive.
That's a great point. And you mentioned having excellent change management in place can increase project success by 7%. So, what are those steps that have to be in place to have change management?
So a large part of ProSci's change management research is around that natural process that people go through when they're confronted with the idea of change. And so ProSci has wrapped that up in the ADKAR methodology, ADKAR, which basically says that people go through a series of steps being awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so when looking at change, a person must first become aware that a change is happening or needs to happen. Once they're aware, they can then start to realize the possible benefits of changing, which then rolls into that desire to undergo the change. And then once the desire is there, a person will start to be ready to seek out knowledge. And that knowledge arms them with the ability to carry out the changes. And then from there, it's a process of reinforcement or consistency to cement the new habits. So in using the ADKAR methodology and evaluation, you start to see where people are sort of hung up in this process. And in knowing where a person is in this natural progression, you have the tools to address the resistance from the appropriate standpoint.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm already having my wheels turning with some follow-up questions for you, but I'll just pull out to the audience. If anyone has any questions along the way, feel free to drop it into the chat. We will be having a Q&A section as we go forward as well. But thank you, Melissa. And who at an organization should be involved in this change management?
Yeah, so everyone, everyone needs to be involved. But some key roles would be a change practitioner, a project manager, a project sponsor. Project sponsors are extremely important in change management. We really need that project sponsor to be actively involved in communicating the change to everyone. In fact, active and visible sponsorship is the #1 contributor to success in any change management plan. ProSci outlines the job of project sponsor with the ABCs. So a project sponsor is responsible for or a project sponsor actively participates in the project, builds a coalition of stakeholders, and communicates effectively throughout the project. So can't stress enough how important this role is in any project. I've personally been involved in projects that lacked a strong project sponsor because they're often very busy. They have a lot of other things to do. So it often happens that role is overlooked. But when you don't have a strong project sponsor, the effect is very significant. It's just really difficult to get that buy-in without that key person to communicate there.
That makes sense. And I feel like we've all been in that situation without a project sponsor, and we know how busy organizations can be and how many initiatives are running at once, that if you're not getting the time of day, it's really challenging and easy to get lost in the mix, I'm sure.
Yes.
And at BrainSell, how does change management play into that blueprinting process?
Yeah, so during a blueprint, we're doing SME interviews, we're doing process mapping interviews. We talk to everybody, you know, in all areas of the company. And so we often uncover areas where there is this resistance. We'll find existing pain points in the organization and just other key indicators of change angst that will need to be mitigated when you start the implementation. And so assessing people is part of our analysis that allows us to find these red flags ahead of the implementation so that as soon as implementation starts, we can kind of hit the ground running with this plan and start getting people on board as early as possible. And the earlier you can start to get people on board, the better.
That's a great point. And sometimes I do find that a third party coming in and being able to speak with people gets out some of that change angst and some of the items that might not be easily seen when you're in an organization as well.
Yeah, because again, that awareness and making sure that people are aware of the change is so important, and it's such a huge help for people to be brought on board as early as possible and just to know what's going on. That will help relieve a lot of people's stress right away.
That makes sense. And not to harp on the negative, but do you mind giving an indication of an example or just an overview of what it looks like when change management isn't present on a project?
Yeah, so in general, often when companies are undergoing a digital transformation, they're not only changing their technology, but they're also changing their processes, even sometimes their basic company structure. And you know, roles and, redefining people's roles and things like that. And so there's a temptation to push for this huge rollout because so much is changing, and
Mm,
with it's tempting to push for this huge rollout and have very little preparation in the way of communication. It's very
mm,
easily overlooked. But these kinds of changes are a lot for people to deal with, and it can be very overwhelming. So when we've seen that clients kind of take this slimmer approach to communication, it just creates a lot of pain along the way, and some of it unnecessary, right? Because if we had a strong plan in place, we could have mitigated a lot of it from the beginning. So that's the reason that BrainSell now offers change management support with ProSci certified change practitioners, because we saw so many projects that really could benefit from having a strong plan in place.
that makes sense. Yeah, the idea of ripping it off like a band-aid doesn't really work with huge strategic change.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Great. Well, those were some of the bigger questions that I had for you. So just like to remind the audience, if you have any questions coming through, please drop them in the chat or in the questions box, and I'll start addressing those. I have one come through so far, Melissa, for you. Is it possible to start change management mid-project?
Yeah, it is. Ideally, change management does start with the project planning, but it's never too late to put something in place. Oftentimes, people don't even realize until the middle of the project that, oh, the people might be an issue here. Um, so that's very common, and putting it in place at some point in time is better than not doing it at all. So yeah, you can start mid-project.
Sense. Great. And how does one get started? Another question we've had come in.
Um, we would definitely recommend, working with a certified change practitioner if possible, just because ProSci has so much research and really great research. So it's a huge benefit to work with somebody who is familiar with all of this research. So that would be a great way to get started. If you don't have a formal change practitioner, you can, in your project planning, just start thinking about how are you going to incorporate, the people side of change in your project plan.
Great point. And do you need to hire someone for this specifically, outsource? Can somebody within an organization take this on? What would you recommend?
Um, it could be all of the above, depending on your organization and your project in general. Is this a one-time project, or do you frequently undergo projects? And so it really just depends on the specifics of your plan. A lot of times the project manager can double as a change practitioner
Hmm.
since they have that plan there. It's usually pretty easy to kind of just put the change management plan aside from that. So it really just comes down to what your company needs are. It can be very different.
Okay, great. And another question we have is, what's the difference between a change plan and a change communication plan? Are they the same, or is there more in a change plan?
There's more in a change plan. So and again, this depends on the structure and how your company decides to structure it. Some projects, depending on the size, might be big enough that there is a communication manager alongside a change management practitioner. So if that's the case, then you would be working together on those plans. You can also have it to where a communication plan is embedded within the change management plan.
Great. And folks, again, if you have any additional questions, drop them in the chat. Another follow-up on the communication side is sometimes there's apprehension to be sharing information too early on. Is there a too early on? What time should information start being shared in a communication plan?
Yeah, so from a change management standpoint, we would say it's never too early for communication. And the reason for that is that part of resistance is people starting to kind of go off on their own and start talking about aspects of this change. And that's when the rumor mills can get started, and that can be really, really difficult to pull back. So that's why we say communicate before that has a chance to get going, because it's very difficult to stop once it starts.
Makes sense. And for folks that are in the awareness stage, get past the awareness and go into desire, but they don't have everyone on board that's excited about the change, what do you recommend? Do you recommend holding off on a project go live? Do you recommend um, organizational alignment? What's a goal to get past some of those hurdles?
Yeah, so if you see collectively that everybody's stuck on this one part of the progression, I would definitely say you want to try to get some organizational alignment and start trying to address it right there. Depending on the severity, it might make sense to pause the project. It really just depends
Mhm.
on how much this is really having an impact.
Great. Thank you. It seems like we are wrapped up on questions. So Melissa, I'll just turn it over to you to ask, is there anything additionally that we weren't able to cover today that you'd want to raise, or any words of advice for folks putting in a change management plan for the first time?
Yeah, I would just say, it can seem really daunting to take on, but just get started, start thinking about how your people are being affected. It really is going to make a difference in the pain that you experience or don't experience. And these projects are, often very complex, and there's a lot going on. And so anywhere that you can mitigate some of that confusion or pain or all of those kinds of things is really valuable.
It's a great point. Great point. A lot going on for folks. Um, I love that we're wrapping up so quickly. We're most efficient webinar folks here, but truly, everyone feel free to connect with Melissa or I or the BrainSell team on LinkedIn as well. If you have any follow-up questions, I know some of the change management can be a lot to address and digest live on a call. So feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation. And then just as a reminder for folks, this is just part one of a series of digital transformation webinars that are coming up. So we'll be joining us again next week when we're going to be talking about streamlining processes. So really excited to go into how process impacts digital transformation and sets the foundation for that in addition to this change management component. So thank you all for joining so much. Yes, we do have this ability to use the QR code to download a handout as well. And then, as noted at the top of the call, you'll be getting these slides sent to you also. So if you can't grab this here, you will have the ability to download the playbook coming out of this as well for digital transformation readiness. Thank you so much for joining us. As mentioned, feel free to reach out to us on any of these platforms or on LinkedIn. We're hoping to continue the discussion with you all and excited for our next change management conversation. And thank you, Melissa. It's so impressive, all the knowledge that you have on change management and your ability to apply it to clients and to our organization. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you all. Take care.